everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Erica. I am a recovered food addict, codependent, and adult child of trauma. And I am really delighted to be with you guys today. This is a subject that's been coming up over the last while with people that I work with one-on-one and in our codependency group, and that's the connection between food and feeling. For me, the food piece was the beginning piece of the understanding the puzzle in my recovery. And for some people, it's a piece that comes later on, but it's definitely a piece of recovery. So one of the reasons that food and feelings are so interconnected in everything that we do is one of the few things that human beings engage in that's all encompassing to our personhood. When we're born, we take our first breath and we look for our first meal. If you touch a newborn baby on the cheek, the first thing they do is turn their face to the side. When you deliver a baby, the baby comes out and they put the baby to the breast. So we take our first breath and we have our first meal, or attempt to have our first meal. So there's an interconnection there right from the beginning. It's designed by God that way. There's a huge connection between us, our personhood, our survival, and food. And it affects every single part of, like I said, our personhood. It affects us physically, emotionally, it affects us socially and culturally, and it affects us spiritually. So physically, obviously, when you feel good physically, you feel good emotionally. If you don't feel good physically, it's very difficult for you to feel good emotionally. Those things are completely interconnected. That idea of being hangry, people say, oh, I'm hangry. It's an absolute thing. You can't separate the two things. They're interconnected with one another. When you have the availability of food and you have good food that you can eat and you know that it's around and you're not fighting or struggling for it, you have a sense of emotional security. People who have had long-term periods of food insecurity have a lot of problems feeling safe and secure in the world regardless. Even though there may be tons of food, that sense of security, that sense of insecurity is always there because food is so imperative for our survival. It's connected to all those pieces. It's a way that we give and receive love. Right? Look at Valentine's Day. What do? We give somebody food. We understand it as a loving thing. Excuse me. Right from the time you're a baby, when someone is feeding you, that's when they're cooing at you and talking to you and loving on you, right? So it connects in your brain this idea of food and comfort and peace and love. And socially, we break bread together, right? That's how we connect with one another. We connect around food culturally, right? It makes us feel like we're part of something. It gives us a sense of well-being. Again, we use it to show affection and love and compassion. It's celebratory. And when we celebrate, that hits our emotions, right? We get a release of dopamine when we celebrate. So food is around, if you think about weddings, how much preparation time and everything does everybody think about the food? And a graduation and a birthday, you get a treat, a food treat if you've done something well, right? All of these things are connected. And in community, here's another example. In community, when somebody passes away or somebody's sick, right? What happens? The parade of Tupperware starts to come in, right? We offer food as a means of comfort, as a means of connecting, as a means of saying, I love you, I'm sorry, eat my pasta, right? And spiritually, there's a connection there too. It's interesting that in the Old Testament, of the 316 mitzvah or rules that the chosen people were supposed to follow, a massive, large number of them are around food. Now, some of them are smart, like don't eat bats. Right? They're just logical ones, but other ones are there to help people understand that food is a nexus point for our connection to God. That's why we say grace. Food is a gift from God, and it's a nexus point to connect us spiritually, is food. And it's interesting that also that starvation is used as a means of torture then. Because the interesting thing about starvation is there's far more awful things that you can do to a person physically than starving them that are more painful. But what happens when a person starves another person is you take away their personhood. Their body gets smaller, you control their emotions, and you also control their ability to make these connections socially, emotionally, and spiritually by keeping them from being able to have something to eat, from them being able to have some food. So one of the things that was really interesting was in the concentration camps in Germany, they discovered that even though people could get killed for doing this, they wrote recipe books out. People sat together and they had imaginary meals, where they would say, oh, you know, I'm going to eat this, I'm going to eat that. My mother made this, my mother made that. And that was their source of connection and of comfort that made them feel human. So that's how important food is to all of the pieces of our body, as of our self, of our personhood. It gives us a sense of comfort. It gives us a sense of self-worth, of connection, of belonging, and all of those things, and also a sense of being loved. And it's interesting that in the celebratory foods, in the special foods, across all cultures, your special food is usually sweet and starchy, right? So think, if I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake, right? On Valentine's Day, we give chocolate. And there's a physiological reason for that. There's a scientific reason for that. Sugar has the same molecular structure as serotonin. And so when you eat sugar, when you eat something sweet, right, the serotonin crosses the blood-brain barrier, goes up into your brain. The little receptor is there for serotonin, and that's the hormone that makes us feel good. And the sugar goes and it locks in together, and the body says, oh, I feel good. The brain says, oh, yes, I feel good. I'm getting serotonin, right? Now, the thing is, sugars normally occur naturally in nature when sugars are natural in nature. I said that twice. They're normally attached to a lot of fiber and stuff. And so in order to get your sugar, the sugars and starches also turn into sugar, and they're also connected to fibers and things in food. When it's in its natural form, you have to eat it. It has to be broken down in your digestive system before it can cross the blood-brain barrier. Okay, but what happens in modern times is we've learned how to refine sugar, right? And when it's in its refined form, especially that white crystallized form, and particularly if you dissolve it into liquid, as soon as it hits your mouth, it's absorbed through the mucosal membranes in your mouth and goes straight up into your brain. It's like rocket fuel. It's the difference between, you know, a steam engine and a jet fighter, right? In terms of what you're ingesting. And it goes up and it bangs into those receptors, right? And it makes you feel good. And that's why there's a definite connection between eating things that are sweet and starchy and feeling good. There's a physiological connection, and then there's a psychological and emotional connection, and the cultural connection, and all those kinds of things. So one of the things, though, that is an issue for us and can become an issue for us as addicts is the addictive personality searches for ways to control the internal condition by manipulating the external. Okay, so we're always searching for means of ease and comfort. And when we look at food and it's already set up as a means of ease and comfort, we can understand how we can start seeking out food as a primary means of ease and comfort. Right? So when we feel bad, right? When we're feeling sad, that trope of the woman breaking up with her boyfriend and eating an entire pint of Haagen-Dazs is a real thing, right? We seek ease and comfort. And if we use the external and we use food to elevate, manipulate, or eliminate how we feel, right? We're sabotaging our ability to move forward in our recovery. If we're using food to do those things, we're sabotaging our ability to move forward in our recovery. Because what we want to do is be able to feel our emotions, and sugar is a mood elevating substance. So if we use sugar when we're feeling bad, and we do that consistently, what we're doing is eliminating the gift that we are getting by feeling that feeling, by eliminating it by eating sugar. And sugar itself, because it's a chemical, is addictive. Right? So what happens is we eat all this sugar, right? Which gives us comfort and all those things. And originally when we first start doing it, it does do those things, right? It gives us comfort. But what happens is our body stops producing its own serotonin because it's getting this fake serotonin that's way easier for it to pick up than producing it itself. So then what happens is we stop eating the sugar and we feel cruddy, right? Why? We don't have serotonin. So what do? We seek out comfort, ease and comfort, and we seek out sugar again. And like anything, our body builds up a tolerance to it. So we have to increase the level of sugars that we're eating up and up and up and up and up in order to get the same bang for our buck. So now you've got the physiological addictive element starting to happen. You've got the psychological where we're reaching for ease and comfort. Now you've got the physiological. And like all addictions, what happens is starts off as ease and comfort, turns on us. Because sugar is an addictive substance, you start engaging in addictive behavior. You start craving and you start eating compulsively, right? And once we start to get into that consequence of craving, right? When I remember thinking, it feels like your eyeballs are being pushed out through your head. You can't have relationships. It ruins your relationships. It stops your ability to be able to have good conscious contact, because what you're thinking about all the time is getting more sugar and how you're going to get it. And when the consequences start to happen, and there are consequences, cultural consequences or physical consequences of having sugar addiction and eating too much, right? It's that we can develop diabetes and all those things. But particularly in our culture, the number one consequence of sugar addiction is that we gain weight. And we start to now we've got a whole new thing. So we've got a consequence of our addiction. Now we're going to try and mitigate that. And that's when all those behaviors start to happen, of bulimia, of restricting, of pathorexia, which is obsessive exercising, and all of those things. And once you're locked into that mindset, once you're on that hamster wheel, you can't get off. All of the other things start to fall apart as we move forward. Now, not everybody becomes addicted to sugar, just the same way not everybody becomes addicted to alcohol or drugs, right? It's not a given that you will. But there needs to be a recognition that if you're reaching for anything outside of yourself for ease and comfort, and you are particularly reaching for sugar, you are dancing with a tiger that could bite you very, very badly as you move forward, because of the fact that all of those feelings and things are interconnected. When I was in treatment when I was blessed to be able to go down to Florida about 30 years ago for treatment, I went to a treatment center that understood that they weren't treating, at that point, I had been diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I weighed 108 pounds. I just given birth to my third child, and I'm 6 feet tall. So they knew that they weren't treating anorexia nervosa, they weren't treating bulimia, and they weren't treating obesity. What they were treating those were symptoms of the disease. There were symptoms of compulsive eating. There were symptoms primarily of sugar addiction. And the reason that they could understand it was sugar addiction was hundreds and hundreds of hours of testimony of people honestly and forthrightly giving their food stories. And the one thing that ran all the way through all of them was sugar. All the way through all of them was sugar. People don't binge on salad, right? People aren't fantasizing about going home and eating 100 pounds of salad. And the other thing is that we tend to focus on the physical thing, right? If you're skinny, you're anorexic. If you're overweight, then only overweight people have food issues. That isn't true. Those are, like I said, symptoms that we try and manage and mitigate. So the person who weighs 80 pounds and the person who weighs 800 pounds are dealing with exactly the same thing. They're just on a continuum of that disease arc, of that addiction arc. Because the person who weighs 80 pounds is not scared of food. They're thinking about food constantly. The person, just as the person who weighs 800 pounds is thinking about food constantly. The difference is the person who's at 80 pounds weighs 80 pounds is going out of their way to try and mitigate the negative social consequence of their food addiction, which is gaining weight. Right? When I weighed 108 pounds, what I was trying to do was get so skinny that I could eat whatever I wanted and I wouldn't have to deal with the social consequence. Right? So we know when we're looking at an addiction, if the 4 C's are present, you have an addiction. If there's craving, if there's compulsivity, if there's consequences, and if there's control, you're looking at an addiction. 100%. And when you're in an addictive state, you cannot have reasonable relationships. You are not an authentic person. You're not authentic to yourself, and you're not able to manage conscious contact, because the craving and the addiction becomes everything. It becomes all encompassing, and that's all you're doing is seeking, that seeking behavior, right? It keeps us from having full mindfulness when we're in that place. Now, one of the issues with food is, unlike alcohol, unlike drugs, right? You don't have to drink alcohol to live. You don't have to take drugs to live. But every single day you have to eat. Every day you have to eat. And I know when I was in rehab, one of the things that they said was, you have to walk the tiger. You have to take the tiger out of the cage 3 times a day and walk with it. So the mindfulness around food is so imperative, because it's so easy to fall back into that thing of, okay, it's ease and comfort. right? And one of the behaviors that happens particularly around food is that negotiating thing that goes on around food, right? Because we're trying to mitigate the consequences. And it's like, okay, I came home and I ate a bag of cookies, but that's okay because tomorrow I won't eat anything. I'm going to mitigate that problem. I'm not going to eat anything. Oh no, now I ate dinner. Okay, but I'll only have salad tomorrow. Oh, I ate a salad tomorrow. Maybe, okay, so if I ate salad tomorrow and if I run up and down the stairs 14 times, then I'll be able, do you see how it just we get caught in it? We get caught in it. God wants us to be whole. He wants us to be healthy, and he wants us to be able to be in conscious contact with him and in community with one another. And food is part of that. But when we're using food for something other than what it's intended for, that robs us from being able to do that. It robs us from being able to do that. So for me, what I had to do with regard to food was I had to surrender it, right? I was powerless over it. That's why 12-step programs work when it comes to food. I was powerless over food. Food controlled me. At the beginning, I thought I was controlling it. At the end, it controlled me. So I had to admit that I was powerless, and I had to give up my control over what I ate. And for me, I had to give it up to a food plan. Everybody's a little bit different, but I had to give it up to a food plan, because I knew that if I was making choices, I was going to fall into my addictive behavior pattern, and I was going to start negotiating and making the wrong choices because I want my drug, right? It makes me feel better. Even things like oranges have a high level of sugar. So if you're working at your food plan, I would find that I was eating oranges 3 times a day. Right? Even though I was trying to eat abstinent, it was still sitting there, that idea of wanting ease and comfort and wanting to have that drug. So it's important as we move through recovery to realize the connection that food has with our feelings, and to make sure that we're not using food as a means, like I said, to control our feelings, to elevate our mood, to manipulate, or to eliminate our feelings. Because one of the things that happens as well with food is it's an easy way to eat angry feelings. Right? You go home, you've had a terrible day, and you eat the bag of chips and you're, right? It helps you push your feelings down to the bottom. It's connected with food. But if you don't reach for that, you don't reach for the thing that's going to help you push that feeling down, then you get to deal with that feeling. And that's the positive thing about it. That's the gift of food. If you are mindful of your food, it's going to give you a roadmap to what's really going on in your heart. If I come home and I want to, stuff my face, I need to look at, do I have a resentment? Am I unforgiving? What's it trying to show me? What is my higher power trying to show me when I'm reaching for that ease and comfort? Food isn't my problem. Food is my solution. So what is my problem? So one of the things that I know that I did and that I've encouraged people to do is to create a food journal. And basically what you do is you say, I feel, I ate, and then. And you'll see the connection that can run through of what you desire and what you reach for in terms of food, particularly if you're reaching for sugar and starch, that you're masking something. If what you want is sugar and starch constantly, what is it that you're trying to mask with the sugar and starch? Because it is a mood elevating drug, 100%. Now, I know for me, a lot of times these things start in childhood. I had a very, very abusive childhood. And I can remember what made me feel good was sitting in a closet eating a chocolate bar. That's when I felt loved. That's when I felt whole. That's when I felt okay. I could rely on that. I could rely on the chocolate bar. I couldn't rely on anything else in my life, but I could rely on the chocolate bar. I knew that if I had that and I could take that and I could hide with that, I could eat that. It tasted good. It made me feel good. It made me feel worthy. It made me feel worthwhile. And it put me in a position where my self-worth was tied to it. And oftentimes in recovery, what happens with us is we have sort of a cascade of addictions that happen. You have a primary addiction, you deal with that, and then you cascade to the next thing, and to the next thing, and to the next thing, which is why I said for me, food was the first part of my recovery puzzle. Some people, it's the last part of their recovery puzzle, that they've gone and they've worked and worked and worked and worked for years, and now suddenly they're having an issue. And people will say that, I don't know what's going on. I ate 5 bags of cookies. Why am I doing that? It's the last piece. Why are you doing that? Well, because you're seeking ease and comfort. And if you're seeking ease and comfort, why are you seeking ease and comfort? Right? We have to be able to be honest with how we feel. And anything that we use that alters that, robs that from us. It takes it away. If I eat sugar and I have a false elevated mood, right? And mood is just an expression of emotion. Okay, so there's no such thing as mood, really. A mood is how you express your emotion, how you're feeling emotionally. If I use sugar to elevate my mood constantly, how am I sabotaging myself by doing that? Then by the same token, as your physicality and emotions are so interconnected, when you're healthy and you're eating really well, then you're going to have legitimate and real feelings. They're not going to be connected to how you're feeling physically. They're going to be just siloed in terms of, okay, now I can get down to the nitty gritty of what it is I feel and what I have to deal with, because I don't have this other piece that's affecting it all the time, this other physical piece. The other thing that happens with sugar is that, like I said, refined sugar, is that when we take it, it shoots our blood sugar up really, really high. It makes you feel really good. But then by the same token, you crash down really low at the bottom. So oftentimes those highs and lows that you're dealing with in your life aren't necessarily coming from real emotionality. They're being affected by physicality. They're being affected by what you eat. Right? Your sugar's going way up, your sugar's going way down, your sugar's going way up, your sugar's going way down. When you're down at the bottom and your bottom of a sugar crash, you're grumpy, you're snarky, you're angry, you don't feel well. Okay, now I've got a whole new cascade of things. Now I'm ashamed of my behavior because I've just not been nice. Now I'm ashamed of my behavior and I'm not feeling very good about myself. What happens in that addictive cycle? Oh, I reach for ease and comfort. What's my ease and comfort? Food. I eat my food. My sugar goes up. I feel better. My sugar comes down. And I'm embarrassed around my food sometimes. You know, there's not a lot of people who come out and tell you, hey, I had a great day today. I ate 4 chocolate cakes. How are you doing? Right? That's not acceptable in our culture. Right? So there's shame around it. Like, oh, right? There's a kooky, crazy behaviors. I know as a restrictor, I used to cut bread so thin you could see through it. I was embarrassed of that behavior. Right? And then I had shame around that behavior. And then I needed more comfort because I was in a shame spiral. So I reached for ease and comfort. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. So food is so central to who we are as our personhood. And our personhood, we need to not ignore it. We need to be as mindful of our food as we are mindful of other things. And oftentimes as addicts, we've never had, and I'm not necessarily talking about a food addict, I'm just talking about addiction in general, we never have anything other than chaos when it comes to all of our relationships, including our relationships with food. I know that some of us, if we really looked at our food life, have never had anything other than a dysfunctional relationship with food. Either we overeat, we undereat. When you're busy in your addiction, you know, if you're addicted to narcotics, you don't eat at all. Right? So there's this whole idea that we've never been in a position where we had this balance, this beautiful balance that God wants us to have, right? He wants us whole. He wants us to be in balance. He wants us to be comfortable. He wants us to seek him for ease and comfort. When we do that, we get that ease and comfort, right? We're designed to desire ease and comfort. And when we have our food life in balance and we're mindful of it, it takes away it gives us an ability to be able to have that level line so that we can deal what's actually going on in our life. Because if you're dealing with the resentment and you're full of sugar and you're going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down like this, it's going to make trying to work on that resentment or the forgiveness piece 1,000 times harder, because your brain is all over the place. And your emotions are all over the place. And the connections are all over the place. When you have your food piece in balance, then it helps to give you that sense of community, that sense of well-being, that sense of connection, that sense of worth. When you eat because you recognize that it's a gift from your higher power and it's used as love to nourish your body and nourish your soul and nourish all of you so that you can then nourish other people, it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful gift. But lots of times what happens with us when I talk about this is people will go, great, now I can't even have chocolate. It's like, oh, okay, so I can't have drugs, I can't have alcohol, I can't gamble, I can't do this, whatever my addictions are. Now you're telling me I can't have sugar, I can't. But I would really, really encourage everybody. I know that this was the paradigm shift that had to happen for me. It's I can have balance. I can have my body feeling optimal so it's not constantly affecting how I feel, so that I am genuine in my relationships. Because when my body is messed up because of my food, I am not genuine in my relationships. And when you step outside of yourself and look at that, you're like, who is that person? Like, why did I do that? Like, I said that and I snarled and I whatever. Well, okay, when was the last time you ate? We say it to our kids. When was the last time you ate? What did you eat? We knew when we raised kids, if you give them sugar, they go crazy and whip around all over the place. Well, we do that to ourselves as adults. We need to start recognizing that and being mindful ourselves. And when that food piece comes into balance, the ability to be able to deal with the other things in our life is increased 1,000-fold, which is one of the reasons why in the rehab that I went to, I was lucky enough by the grace of God to have 2 stints in rehab about 30 years ago. The first one for food, the second one for adult child issues. And one of the things that they did with everybody, why did I disappear? Oh, hug. One of the things that they did with everybody, I was like, whoop, I disappeared. One of the things that they did with everybody is they took everybody off refined sugar and refined flour. And interestingly enough, you know, in the States, there's lots of professions that you have that they do random drug testing. So literally you go to work in the morning, you drop hot urine in your rehab at night. That's basically what would happen. People literally coming from work into rehab. And if they didn't fulfill the rehab program, they lost their job. And I mean, their life was a shambles. So there was a lot to, on the line. And you know, the one contraband that got pulled into that rehab the most, the one contraband that came in all the time was sugar. People risked their whole life to get sugar. There was one guy who actually had a friend throw a bag of Miss Fran's cookies over the wall like a drug drop. That's the hold that it can have on us. So my encouragement to you is be mindful of your food, recognize that it's a gift. Look at the 4 C's when it comes to sugar and what you're eating, particularly sugar, right? Is it present? If it's present there, you're looking at dealing with an addictive portion there. And the wonderful gift about that is we know as people who are in recovery and who are recovering, that there is recovery from that. And it gives you an even bigger picture once you get that piece taken care of as well. And even if it isn't an addictive piece, if you're mindful of it and you understand how food affects feeling and your connection to the community and your spiritual connection, it just makes everything better. Thanks, guys.